Yesterday, Sean Atleo, the National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, along with other Aboriginal leaders, attempted to reset the relationship with Canada's Prime Minister on behalf of First Nations people. We know First Nations problems cannot be solved in a one-day meeting, but more meaningful dialogue and new ideas are a step in the right direction. Lawyer and author Helin is all about setting new courses for urban and rural Aboriginal people to help them establish self-reliance. It is my pleasure to welcome Helin back to Studio 4 to tell us more.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Nice to see you again. I'm sure you watched yesterday closely with much interest.
Yeah, I did, but I think there tends to be too much attention, even though that those kinds of meetings are important, put on such meetings, because what you're really talking about is trying to undo 150 years of basically socializing Aboriginal people into a dependency mindset. And in my opinion, in addition to the top-down type of changes that need to be made, I think there also needs to be ordinary people need to be made aware of how they got into the situation of economic dependency that they're in, and to understand what they need to do to help themselves.
Mm-hmm. And as you know, yesterday the Indian Act was brought up several times. The Prime Minister suggesting it was not broken, it needed some tweaking, it had deep roots, and some of the chiefs saying no, the Indian Act needs to be abolished. So to abolish, to rejig, to what?
Well, the practical problem that I think the Prime Minister faces is that he now has a group of chiefs that say they want to abolish the Indian Act, but you have 633 First Nations, and a lot of them don't want it abolished. And even though it creates all kinds of problems for moving First Nations people constructively forward, a lot of the chiefs are very, very uncertain about sort of living with a new devil rather than the one they know. And so that's the problem. So his idea is to make incremental changes to the Indian Act, and that's what they're doing.
Well, it could be a turning point, or maybe not a turning point, between First Nations and the Crown, but I suggest that if the Prime Minister took 6 years to meet with the chiefs, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
Why so long?
Well, I think it's a matter of practical politics, first of all. If you don't have a majority, you can't do much.
True.
And so now that they have a majority, they're looking at various aspects of how the Indian Act system has set out communities, and we know about all of the problems with the remote communities and so on. And at the end of the day, I think that they're making some good steps forward. There are some real problems with the way the Indian Act has set up Aboriginal communities. They basically were set up to be rural municipalities, and they are set up in a way where there isn't actually real accountability from a political point of view. In most systems where you elect somebody, what happens is you have your electorate, or the elected person, the chiefs in this case, should be accountable to their electorate, and that's the way it works ordinarily. But under the Indian Act, the chiefs are accountable to the Minister of Indian Affairs. Mm-hmm. So there's a disconnect in accountability, and it leads to all kinds of problems, including corruption and other problems, and those issues need to be addressed.
When you look at the Ontario Reserve, Attawapiskat,
yeah,
I think that's right, and the horrendous circumstances, the tent frames and the sheds and the problems on that reserve, it's not isolated. It's remote, but it's not isolated. How would you attempt to fix it? The feds give them money, as you know.
Yeah, well, the solution that has been put forward by the sort of a group of what I call the old Indian Act chiefs type thinking, is just throw more money at it. And you can throw $1 zillion at those problems unless people in that community understand what they need to do to change their lives, how they've been made economically dependent, how having that mindset will continue to foster ongoing dependency, and there is no escape from that situation unless people there can understand how they got into economic dependency and how they can get out, and why it's in their self-interest to get out.
And it's in their self-interest because if they rejig what's going on in the traditional territories and look at mineral rights and money and entrepreneurial ideas.
Well, at the heart of why welfare or anything like that doesn't work, not just for Aboriginal people, for anybody, has to do with, I think what we talked about last time I was on your show was a lesson I learned from my grandmother. When I was a little boy, she would tell me, just before she would kick me outside when I was moping around the house, you should go outside and do something useful and you'll feel better about yourself. And when you start to take apart the psychology of welfare, and I think there's a Quebecois songwriter, Felix Leclerc, who wrote a line in his song that the best way to kill a man is to pay him for doing nothing. When I first heard that, I understood that to make absolute common sense to me, but I didn't really know why. Why does that make sense? Because I knew it made sense to me because I'd seen it throughout my life. And then I started reading, and I came across something that the American psychologist William James said: the deepest craving that people have is the need to feel valued and wanted by your family, and I would add your family, your community, and so on. And so what happens is when somebody gives you something like a welfare check, what they're doing is they're giving you your ability to have your material sustenance, but what they cannot give you, and why it makes sense that the best way to kill a man is to pay him for doing nothing, is they cannot give you the ability to validate your sense of self-worth without working for what you get.
In my early feminist days, we quoted Simone de Beauvoir a lot, and one of the things she said was economic freedom is the first freedom.
Absolutely. If you don't have control over your economic life, particularly in this modern economy, you don't have control over anything. And as I pointed out last time to you, there's a psychological profile that goes with that welfare mindset. And one of the interesting things is that in the middle class these days, there's a phenomenon which psychologists call affluenza. And people are unwittingly buying their kids material things and not expecting them to do anything for it, and creating the same mindset as somebody on welfare in their own children in the middle class. This is a huge phenomenon.
Sure. So back to teach a man to fish, help him to fish, teach a woman to fish, help her to fish. She will fish, she will, her self-esteem will rise, his self-esteem will rise. She'll feel good about herself and not look for a next handout, but think of a new idea. It sounds simple, but when you have a remote reserve, an urban nation, how do you make it happen? Especially without the premiers at the table. Because it's so complex. You've got the Prime Minister listening, and then off to Davos to go to the Economic Forum. Got out of there, didn't he?
Yeah,
that was smart.
He got out of Dodge real quick.
He got out of Dodge.
I think and this is actually the reason why I'm writing these books that I'm writing, because what I understood is that the way people think is we think in terms of visual images. And writing and talking and everything else is just a way of creating pictures in their mind. And if you can explain to people in a way that they can understand, especially if they don't have a lot of education, how they can, first of all, how they got into the situation that they're in, and then how to get out of it. If you can paint those two pictures in their mind, then you've done what is the basic building block to helping people help themselves.
Sure, but as you know, there's fear of change, as always, in all of us. But if you look at health and land claims and governance and education and all of those issues, bottom line, to solve those, you have to get to the person, get to the individual.
Absolutely, and to your point about fear of change, everybody tends to think that Charles Darwin said it's a survival of the fittest, but what he actually said is it's the most adaptable that survive, not the smartest, not the strongest.
It's the resilient.
And what's happening in modern societies, the rate of change is taking place so fast that we are having to be more adaptable as a species than just about anybody in the history of people. And so it's really important to understand that. It's what I call the mind of reinvention. You have to be prepared to see where things are going and roll with it. For example, I've started writing books. Where is the whole book industry going? The book industry is going towards e-readers. It's like 1.5 times to regular books. So you have to shift gears or you're out of business.
And you have to be a forward thinker today, or you're out of business. Former Prime Minister Paul Martin suggested, I think yesterday or the day before, stop studying this, go to the reserve, see what's going on, figure out a plan. We don't need any more studies.
We don't need any more studies, and we need to also start listening to the people in the communities. The problem with the AFN as a political system is that what happens is the chiefs in the communities elect the regional chiefs, and they also elect the national chief. What people in the communities would like to do, and in the cities, 70% of Aboriginal people from reserves are in the cities and rural areas, and not in their reserves, is they say they need a voice. So there's a sort of disconnect in democracy in that people cannot elect their own leader. And so what happens is you concentrate all the power in the hands of the chiefs, and so you're not getting, I think, a real reflection of the political will of everybody.
Interesting, because there's always internal politics.
Lots of them.
Lots of them. We'll come back. Calvin Helin, our guest, one of his books, first one, right, was
Yes.
Dances with Dependency, and the second one was
Economic Dependency Trap.
We'll come back.